A coalition of groups was in Ottawa today in a last-ditch effort to try to get sweeping changes to the government's controversial environmental assessment legislation, Bill C-69. The Senate proposed more than 250 amendments to the bill. The Trudeau government accepted almost 100 before sending the bill back to the Senate. But oil and resource industry spokespeople say their proposed changes have all been rejected, and they say that means continued decline for the sector and the Canadian economy as a whole. CPAC's Martin Stringer spoke with two of the representatives at today's press conference.
Charlene Johnson and Dennis Darby, thanks very much for taking the time. I want to start with, first and foremost, what is it you hope the Senate will do?
I hope that they would go back to the original amendments and push for government to pass it as it was. Obviously, there were nearly 200 amendments. That speaks to the condition of the bill in its original form. And the amendments that were passed, the amendments that were not passed do not reflect our concerns. So we want them to reinstate what was there originally.
Now, you know, and you've heard from the Senate, they're sort of saying it's going to really have to be a force measure for them to go back and fight again against the House of Commons and reinstate amendments. You have a particular concern in terms of the offshore in Newfoundland and Labrador and around the country. What is your particular concern?
Sure, it's more of a regional concern, but certainly it has implications for other life cycle regulators as well. Joint management has been eroded in the past. We're asking that that be put back into the Atlantic Accord, be preserved as it was in 1985, but also another major concern in terms of the majority of the seats on a review panel would rest with the government. So that's not just a concern for offshore, that would be a concern for all other life cycle regulators as well, in terms of having that centralized decision making in Ottawa about our resources is certainly an issue of concern.
If you had to boil it down, if someone said to you, look, there's not going to be a reinstatement of all of those clauses and all of those amendments, and you had to boil it down to two or three big principles that need to be addressed, what would they be?
So if you look in broad strokes, it's certainty on timing. So having a commitment of timing for when approvals, how long the process will take us. Right now, it's very, very weak.
So what they call a hard cap?
Somewhat. Second part, the inclusion of and the primacy of local input, local stakeholders, rather than global or outside stakeholders from away. And third is really the importance of having the economic impact as one of the parts of the assessment, not a may consider, but must consider the economic impact. So those are the three areas: economics, the local consultation or local input, and timing.
One of the points that's been made by environmentalists, but also by the government, is that the biggest knock on Canadian industry has been the uncertainty, and that once this framework gets put in place, that foreign direct investment will return, that we will get past this, and the worst thing that's been happening has been just the argument over getting a new regime in place. How do you respond to that?
There's still too much uncertainty and ambiguity in this bill to provide the clarity that our investors are looking for. There's words in there such as the minister can extend the extensions previously provided. That's not language that provides clarity to investors. So still much ambiguity in the bill yet.
You mentioned the Atlantic Accord. So these regional boards are spelled out in the Atlantic Accord. Is there a possibility of court action if this bill goes ahead and if it's passed into law?
Certainly under Section 4 of the Atlantic Accord Implementation Act, it does say that this bill supersedes this bill or any other bill. But whether or not there be court action, I guess, would be a better question put to the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. I'd certainly encourage that it would be looked at.
I guess that's the other question, is, and I call it the 100-pound gorilla in the room. If this goes ahead, if the Senate doesn't, reinstate all of those amendments, where do you go from here?
Well, regrettably, you're going to have the status quo, which is right now we have governments suing governments, groups taking government to court, and continued uncertainty. And what we're worried about is that companies, global companies, direct investment, they don't hang around and say, well, okay, we'll wait till Canada gets its shop in order. They'll invest somewhere else. And that's our biggest concern.
What about people who say the downturn in foreign direct investment has been largely the result of low prices? That we're suffering, for sure, but it's not been because of any regulatory regime.
We have tremendous prospectivity, and I'm going to speak specifically to oil and gas. And we've seen the price of oil decline. At the same time the price of oil has been declining, the interest in our offshore has been increasing. We have $3.9 billion in land sales over the last 4 years. That has gone this way while the price of oil has gone that way. So I would say that's a part of it, but certainly not all of it.
And remember, this bill's not just about oil and gas. It's about any infrastructure-based project which requires an environmental assessment. So that uncertainty will continue. If we don't have clarity on how long it takes and what the rules are, we're going to continue to have the situation where Canada has been lagging in foreign direct investment in all kinds of capital equipment. As manufacturers, we're the people that supply all these big projects. And so that's the worry. The worry is so really the oil price is one part of it, but this is much more than just about oil and gas.
Okay, and the last question, and that is, we know that the Conservative Party of Canada has promised to rescind this bill. Does this make or guarantee that this is going to be an election issue in the next election? I can see you hesitating to do the political square.
No, anything is possible. We have to continue to lobby. I was used to being lobbied to. Now I'm lobbying for. So you can never give up on that. You have the short game and then you have the long game. I was just going to answer something to your previous question to give you an example of what happens when decision making gets centralized in Ottawa. Before environmental assessments for our offshore were taken over in Ottawa in 2012, the average timeline for an exploration well, which is a very short-term in duration activity, was around 380 days. When that decision-making was placed in Ottawa, that went to about 900 days. Didn't do anything to add extra protection to the environment. It was just added process, added timeline. So as I said in the press conference, protection first, progress, but not necessarily added process, because it does nothing for added protection of the environment.
Mr. Darby, election issue?
I think so. I think this will be an important issue for Canadians to talk about, and I have no idea which way it's going to turn, and I don't want to make any prognostications, but I think it's important that we actually have a conversation about the economy and about the importance of being competitive. And I think this bill, or all the discussion around it, is really central to, do we have a competitive business environment to attract investment and create good jobs?
Okay. I want to thank both of you for taking the time. Thanks for speaking with us, and obviously we'll continue to watch this with great interest. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.